Perfect. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. I am Kristen Tanner. I'm the president of the Oklahoma chapter of the Computer Science Teachers Association. And we're really excited that you're joining us tonight for a special guest speaker. Please make sure that you have signed in. That's how you'll receive the free gift this evening, and it'll ask for your address at the end. I promise you, I will only use that in order to order your free gift. We will not put you on any spam mailing list anywhere. So there'll be a sign-in link in the chat, or you can also scan the QR code. This evening, we're excited to welcome our special guest speaker. NJ Ravilis is a computer science and media production teacher at the Conservatory of the Arts in Springfield, Massachusetts. And as a queer disabled educator with a master's degree in electrical engineering from Columbia University, they teach at an intersection of privilege, experience, and passion for inclusion. And outside of the classroom, NJ enjoys gardening and fighting an ongoing battle with the invasive plants in their neighborhood. And we're super excited that NJ is here to share some tips for making our classrooms more inclusive and welcoming to meet the needs of all of our students. So I'm going to stop sharing. And NJ.
Yep, I'm here. So hello, thank you so much for having me. My name is NJ. As Kristen said, I'm a computer science teacher in Massachusetts. I teach at the Springfield Conservatory of the Arts, and I'm really happy to be here. So I'm going to share my own screen. So let's do this. And I have my own slides here. So this was a talk that was originally presented at the CSTA National Conference last summer, but I'm happy to be sharing it, and I've actually added to it since then, so you're getting a little bit of an updated version. But right now, I'd love it if everyone could type your name, pronouns, and professional role in the chat. So I don't know any of you. I've been emailing with Kristen a bit, but I'm going to keep an eye on the chat to see who people are and where they're from and everything. So I will be using subtitles. I've gotten used to PowerPoint, which does them automatically. All right, so subtitles through Google Slides. So if you have any other accessibility needs, you can let me know how I can accommodate you. So you can either message me privately, or you can just say out loud if there's something you'd prefer that I do. This is an hour. This was originally designed to be a 45-minute session, but I'm going to talk pretty fast. So luckily we're recording this. You can ask me questions afterwards if you want to chat more. So I'm going to try to cover a ton of concrete strategies for helping students in all different ways. But this is what we're going to do. So welcome everyone. You notice I also have Spanish. Bienvenidos a todos. I teach in a school district that is predominantly Puerto Rican. And so I'm used to doing things a little bit more bilingual. I'm sure in Oklahoma, you might have other populations of other languages that you're used to or not. But we want to make sure that we're welcoming everyone. And being aware of languages is just one way to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and move on with my slides because I'm going to try to cover a lot tonight. And I will share my slides out afterwards also if anyone wants. These are session norms from the CSTA conference, but they kind of also apply here. So this is being recorded. By default, you're a viewer, right? So be professional and respectful. I don't expect that to be a problem with anyone here, but just to kind of go over that. So these are our foundational understandings and anchor questions. So in computer science, we're probably all aware by now that participation in these computer science classes mirrors different issues that we have in society. So those might be issues related to who thrives, who dies, whose body matters, whose history survives, who gets policed, who is safe, and who is missing. So this is going to be a space to unpack some existing assumptions, ask questions, and talk about how we can create a more welcoming classroom for marginalized students, especially our trans and disabled students. So as educators, I hope we're all here because we agree that we have a responsibility to welcome and support all of our students. This is a little infographic from the CDC, which is a little bit sad, right? This is talking about the fact that 27% of our transgender students feel unsafe at or going to or from school, 35% are bullied, and 35% attempt suicide. So hopefully by doing some simple things to create and enforce anti-bullying policies and identifying and training supportive school staff, which hopefully all of you will be, we can actually make a big difference here. So in my school, it's kind of funny, I'm looking at this stat that says almost 2% of high school students identify as transgender. I teach at a conservatory of the arts in Massachusetts, and so we have way higher numbers of trans students, but you might feel like you have fewer than that because you might have students who aren't out, who haven't really been talking about or exploring their gender identity the same way. So I'm coming in with a little Massachusetts bias here. But I also wanted to be mindful of that and introduce the language that I'm using. You'll notice that I identify myself as queer. This talk is called Queering Computer Science. So queering means examining something through a lens that makes it strange or challenges it in some way. So for myself as a queer disabled Jewish educator with a master's degree in electrical engineering, I have a lot of firsthand experience of bias and discrimination in STEM education and industry. So when I was in Holyoke, which you don't know Massachusetts very well, a neighboring town to where I am now, I basically was able to flip their programming and web vocational program to be predominantly female and non-binary, which I was really proud of. So we all know computer science can be an accidentally unwelcoming space for a lot of people. And so here we're going to be challenging our biases and diving into concrete strategies. So I'm a teacher. I value your time as teachers. And so I'm going to be going through as many concrete strategies as possible. So here they are bullet pointed, and my slides are going to cover all these different things. So I'm going to take a breath right now and have some tea, and you can glance at this agenda, and then we will dive right in. Great. So first thing, early in the school year, hopefully, although it's never too late to do this, this is something that I ask all of my students. This is part of a getting to know you, who are you, just sort of collecting info about all of my students. I ask what name they prefer to go by in school, how they pronounce their name, what pronouns they want me to use for them, and then some other more open-ended things. So here you can see it's a screenshot of a Google form where for the pronouns, I have check boxes. So some students might have more than one set of pronouns that they use, or they might want to fill in other in some way. And then some students have more complicated situations. So we want to hold space for things like a student might feel comfortable and safe at school going by a certain name and pronouns, but at home, when you call home, they would be really stressed if you did that, if you outed them to their family. So you want to be mindful of that and let students explain that. And then you can also ask, now I'm not up on the laws in Oklahoma. In Massachusetts, we have amazing laws protecting our trans students. In Oklahoma, you're going to be on different case by case depending on your school admin and things like that. But in my case, I have a spot to say if you want help changing your school email address or student records, that's something that I can help with. So in Massachusetts, if students are 14, they can decide that. And if they're younger than 14, then they can decide that with the support of their family. So it's not perfect, but it's something, and it's something that makes a big difference to students, especially online. Seeing their name everywhere is a big deal. So this is just one concrete thing that you can do. If you're like, I don't think I'm going to do that, that's okay. I'm going to give you like 15 other strategies today. So checking your biases. Talking to your school counselors and teachers about course recommendations and tracking is a big, big thing you can do. We all have biases about who we think looks like a computer scientist or who we think might be successful. And that is a huge factor in how students do in school, right? So when guidance counselors are scheduling students, when we're recommending kids in high school for different things, we really want to be mindful of this. Something that can be really helpful is having elective rotations. So in middle school, the opportunity to take computer science classes, just like art classes and music classes, is something that can help a lot. And in our classes, once students actually enroll, we want to be careful who we're giving attention to, how we're praising or critiquing different students. And I'm a huge proponent of doing 6 through 12 pathways. So a lot of the time, by the time, an 8th or 9th grader is choosing their electives in high school, that's sometimes too late. And there's already all of these social biases, sexism, all different things affecting students. So if we can get middle school or even elementary school computer science classes in, that can make a big difference. And I have links here. I'll share my slides out. And there's links here with other presentations I've given, articles that go into this a little bit more. But this isn't new. This article that I have a screenshot of here is from 2014. Like, we've known this has been an issue for a long time. So hopefully we're starting to actually tackle this better. Another thing that we can all do is showcase diverse professionals. So there's TED Talks, there's the code.org talks, there's all different, video libraries and things online, all different resources that you can pull from so that when you're showing videos in class, it's not always a white man explaining things, and this is something that my students love. My students love being able to see people who look like them or who look cool. Like, even if you don't have a classroom full of people with pink hair or a bunch of Black students, having all different people just creates interest. It makes it more exciting for students. Students engage better with things. Incorporating current events is also a really neat thing to do. So here are a bunch of screenshots of, news headlines that maybe it's not exactly in your curriculum to talk about, but it probably relates to things that you are talking about in class. So talking about social media networks and hate speech, talking about the ACLU and tech companies and, ICE and CBP, talking about Facebook and fake news, talking about how do we get a taxi if we're blind, new emojis, including more people, right? So all different things that are going on in the world that relate to what's going on in the class and in some way relate to some sort of social justice or inclusivity issue is something you can be, keeping an eye out for just in your personal life. So you can bring that into the classroom. Some teachers will have like a weekly current events thing, depending on your curriculum, depending on how you structure things, teaching kids to read the news, all different things like that. I love teaching about fake news. Students are very excited about it. They're very engaged with it. Since the last several years, that's a phrase that's gotten popular to talk about. And then we can kind of break down how do we do better research and different things like that. So lots of different directions to go in there. Changing classroom language. So just some simple do's and don'ts. So as much as possible, don't address students as boys and girls. Don't split students into gendered teams or groups. So that sort of boys versus girls stuff can make a lot of students very uncomfortable. Do use they in word problems and examples, and do talk about gender stereotypes. So when students bring things up, if students say girls are bad at math, if students say anything, boys are better at sports or something like that, talk about it. Talk about how we make assumptions. Talk about how these are things that in the world have been issues for a long time. Don't be afraid to talk about it. And if you're a playful person, there's a bunch of terms up here for gender neutral ways that you can talk to people. So depending on what age group you're teaching and how silly you're comfortable being, a simple thing that is, comfortable in any context is saying everyone, hello everyone is something that works even with adults, but being able to say, hey, movers and shakers, hey, snickerdoodles, depending on what kind of classroom you teach to, those might work, they might not. I used to teach at a school that was all responsive classroom trained. And so we were taught to address students as, good morning, scientists, good afternoon, readers. So depending on what is or isn't comfortable for you, you might want to think about things like that and how you talk to your students in general. Having diverse stock images is another big thing. So it turns out if you do a Google search for man, woman, computer, you get a lot of pictures of men pointing at computers over women's shoulders. So that's no good, right? I love this quote from Whoopi Goldberg. I'm a big Star Trek fan, but this is her saying, well, when I was 9 years old, Star Trek came on. I looked at it and I went screaming through the house, come here, mom, everybody come quick, there's a black lady on television and she ain't no maid. I knew right then and there, I could be anything I wanted to be. So a big thing that you can do is just include more interesting pictures on your slides. So when you're teaching to students, when you're making handouts, keep, cycling through pictures that aren't just white people, that aren't just men, that are, people of all ages, all different, if someone has a visible disability. So again, I'm going to link my slides and you can look through my stock photos. I have friends who use wheelchairs and stuff like that, and I've asked them to pose with their laptops and things just so that I have more interesting photos. So I'm hoping as time goes on that more of the typical stock images are going to improve. But in the meantime, gathering what I can when I can, I kind of just keep a slide deck so I can flip through it when I need something. This is going to give me a talking break. This is a poem that's amazing. That's by a student. So I'm going to play this and give you all kind of a minute to reflect about it.
a world so full of color, why would I choose to be colorblind? With all the blue in the sky and the green in my eyes and the orange of a monarch butterfly, why would I choose to be colorblind? See, so many teachers have said to me in an effort to promote inclusivity, I don't see color. An otherwise harmless statement, but when it comes to race, it's not quite the same as you think. What you mean is that you love all of your students equally. All the students you have the capacity to serve, but in actuality, your students are not all treated equally, and they're also different colors. The last thing you want to do when it comes to race is erase the things that make us unique, erase a piece of what we see staring back at us. It's not about not seeing color. It's not about negating it. It's about celebrating it and raising the voices of Black authors, Black activists, Black leaders, Black heritage, Black existence, but resisting the single narrative. Resisting the story that Africa is one big territory with nothing but huts and famine. It's examining our own biases, our own prejudices, and accepting that you are not immune to making mistakes. So make them. Then take them as an opportunity to learn, because isn't that what we're here to do? Isn't that the spirit we're fostering? It's exhausting being young and Black in the country we're living in. Your students are exhausted, but not giving in. When it's been 400 years, you learn to cope. So I hope you take their hands and make an effort to understand and see color. Then read about it. Go to BSU meetings, be about it, meaning roll up your sleeves and apply what you're learning. Don't rely on the one Black student in your class to carry their entire community on their backs. Don't ask them to preach, but allow them to speak their truth if they so choose, and use their name. Even if it's hard to pronounce, announce your allyship. Wave it like a flag across the room. You have the opportunity to make your space a safe one. So take it and name racism when you see it. It's not teasing, it's feeding the beast of white supremacy. So seize the moment to dismantle the hate and educate. It's what you do best. Address the uncomfortable, lean into what is difficult to talk about, because it all starts with conversations, hard ones. We must talk about redlining, talk about healthcare inequalities, talk about employment disparities, talk about hair and how all hair types are professional. Racism is not conceptual, it is real and it is perpetual. It is not political, but it is critical that you use your audience to promote tolerance. Talk about it. Read about it and be about it. See color, then use it to paint a better future for your students.
So I love that poem. It makes me cry. I love hearing from our students about things like this. This isn't one of my students. This was a video that was shared with me several months ago. And I just love it, and I want to share it with every single teacher I know, because I know a lot of us, we maybe were raised in a way where we thought that the goal was for everyone to be equal in such a way that we aren't seeing color, right? That seems nice. That seems like treating everyone equally seems like something that we hear about on our Saturday morning cartoons is a nice thing, but really celebrating differences is a better goal. And so if I hear another educator say that they don't see color, I get curious about what they mean by that. And I try to have deeper conversations with them about how we can do things that actually celebrate all of our differences instead of just erasing them. So I love the way that this is phrased in this spoken word poem. So I'm gonna keep moving on with more concrete strategies, but I just love that as a little segment to include in here. So one thing that you can do is honor all different holidays and months throughout the year. So if we're celebrating all different cultures, you can think about Black History Month, which is right now, hopefully we're all aware, Hispanic Heritage Month, Pride Month, Trans Day of Visibility, Day of Silence, Coming Out Day, Trans Day of Remembrance, all different religious holidays. So again, depending on your admin, be cautious here, right? Like you don't want to get in trouble for I don't know, trying, some parents going to say you're trying to convert all of your students to Islam or something. But think about it. Think about pointing out all different New Years or writing in different languages. So here I have, Chinese New Year. I have a card that says Novum Godum, which is in Russian, Shana Tova in Hebrew, all different, languages, and celebrate that. Celebrate all different holidays as much as you can in your classroom. And when things do come up that are negative, make sure that you're not being a bystander. So when a student says something that's inappropriate, hurtful, or bigoted, these 4 steps are things that Dr. Khalees Warnham really emphasized and laid out so clearly that I wanted to share that also. So that was part of a PD that I did earlier this year. And I thought Dr. Warnham was just brilliant on breaking it down in this way, because it's something that I feel like I have been figuring out how to do, but having 4 concrete steps really helps me. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to mark the moment. So if a student says something like, girls can't do computer science, right? We want to pause class, right? We want to say, I just heard someone say, girls can't do computer science. And then you pause, right? You want to clarify, paraphrase, say what it is that you notice. So you can say, I notice there are girls in this classroom, or I notice, if it's true, I notice I'm a girl, and paraphrase what that sentence or whatever it was that you overheard was. And then you get to choose what happens next. So depending on the mood in your classroom, you might kind of say, we don't say things like that here. But the 4th step here is really interesting and thought-provoking, which is that our role as educators is to teach critical thought. So it's good to just shut things down and say, no, we don't talk like that here. That's not language we use, right? So that's something that I sort of more traditionally might have said in response to students making comments like that. But teaching critical thought is really more important. So turning to that student or turning to the class and saying, what do you mean by that? What makes you think that way? What evidence do you have for that, right? And thinking about where these assumptions come from, because it's one thing if I teach a student that a phrase or a certain comment isn't allowed in my classroom, but I want to teach them how to think about it outside of my classroom also. So this is something that students have brought to my attention over the years, is they'll say, well, I feel really safe in your room, but people in the hallways are, using different language, or other things are happening sort of in the school, but not in my class. And so we want to address this in a way that sort of gets more to the root of the problem instead of just shutting it down right in the moment. And a reminder that if it's said out loud, you have to interrupt it out loud. So of course, the easier thing is just to pretend it wasn't said, to ignore it, to hope it goes away. But if we hear something, we've got to say something. So those are some important things to keep in mind. When you're lesson planning, so the previously interrupting things in the moment, those are on the fly things. But if you're a planner, you can plan to engage all of your students. So these are sections, this is like lifted right from one of my lesson plans, where this was a database, like, SQL kind of lesson, where students had to do, this was a high school, like more rigorous course. But I was deliberately creating interdisciplinary connections, anti-racism things, all different ways to explore the material. So in this case, interdisciplinary could have been health, wellness, sports, biology. I was talking about Fitbit. So Fitbit has some really interesting things going on where they have some racial issues with their data because their sensors don't work the same on darker skin tones as lighter skin. And so talking about that with students, talking about how, Fitbit data can be used to solve crimes, how it can help with your personal health and wellness, all different sides to issues, introducing a lot of nuance, again, critical thinking, along with our computational thinking for computer science skills. And I like to give students the ability to choose their own data set. So I provide, there's tons of data sets out there in the world, obviously, but things about NASA, the Super Bowl, Pokemon, the NBA, movies, countries, Marvel characters. I'm not just going to tell students, okay, you have to analyze Fitbit data. I'm going to try as best I can to mix things up so that students can find things that are meaningful to them. And these like bolded headings here, these are things that I try to put in every single one of my lesson plans. So I'm not perfect at it, it's a work in progress for me, but I'm going through my scope and sequences and trying to actively, mindfully plan for all of these different things. I also try to plan to support all students. So this means things like written and oral directions are provided for all assignments. I use subtitles. the SQL commands or other vocab words, right? We're going to display those. We're going to have a vocabulary word wall, hopefully somewhere in the classroom, even if it's just a whiteboard. Lots of code exemplars. Students are encouraged to think and draft in their home language. So I happen to be bilingual with English and Spanish, so students can draft in Spanish and I can understand it. But I've had students in the past that speak Japanese. I don't know, I mean, I can maybe count to 3 in Japanese and that's about it. I can say maybe cat and dog, right? I don't know what they're drafting if they're writing in Japanese, but that's fine. If that's what they're more comfortable in, that's great. What they're going to produce, especially in computer science, is probably going to be in JavaScript or Python or something. So it's going to end up in a language that I know in the end, but having students do their rough drafts in languages they're more comfortable in can help a lot. Slides and other visuals are clearly organized for ease of student comprehension, and I teach close reading strategies. So talking to your literacy teachers, if you teach somewhere that has, ELA teachers, hopefully, annotation skills, context clues, reinforcing those same skills, because we can use those in computer science just as much as we can use them in English class. So that's kind of a neat thing that I've been trying to emphasize with code literacy, as well as, just general English comprehension and literacy. Speaking of language, we can be shifting our language about disability. So it turns out that there's been a lot of back and forth on this over the years, but right now, at least, identity first language is preferred by a lot of disabled people, including me. So disabled isn't a bad word. You'll hear me say that I am disabled, I have disabilities, right? That doesn't mean that I'm being negative about myself. That just means I'm talking about my health issues. That's me talking about my body. And so a lot of people prefer that. And so while this might disagree with other trainings you've had, you might have been told that we're supposed to say things like a person with autism. But a lot of people feel like that's a little bit more stigmatizing because it's implying that autism is a bad thing, whereas saying, oh, this is an autistic person, I have an autistic student in this class, I have a disabled student. That's not a bad thing. It's just an aspect of them. Just like we wouldn't say, oh, I have a friend, they're a person with Christianity, right? That suddenly that makes it sound like Christianity is a bad thing, right? I would just say, oh, I have a Christian friend. So we want to be shifting our language a little bit there if we can be mindful about it. And remember that the way that different disabilities, especially autism, the way that these things are portrayed in the media is not actually what they look like in school. I teach very few white students. I have disabled students, right? I have disabled students of color, and I've almost never seen media representations of that. I have 2 Puerto Rican kids who use powered wheelchairs. That's nowhere in popular media. You're lucky if you see anyone of color in any kind of mobility device, much less, an actually powered wheelchair is kind of a next big thing. I'm noticing in this illustration that this wheelchair here is not actually what most people who use wheelchairs would be using. This is a very hospital style wheelchair. But anyway, we always have room for improvement here, but remembering that things should be more and more diverse, right? So another thing here with supporting all of our students with all of their different needs is broadly supporting executive function. So I don't know if executive function is a phrase that people are familiar with, but basically the way that our brains do stuff. Right? The way that we organize ourselves, the way that we just sort of know that if a teacher hands us a worksheet, we take a pencil, we put it on the paper, we start reading and answering the questions. Those are executive functioning skills. And so 2 key strategies for helping students that struggle with that is making things into smaller steps. So you can see in the illustration on the left there, we have someone climbing a ladder very easily because the rungs are closer together, and someone who can't get started because that first rung is too far away. So making smaller steps. So sub-goal labeling is sort of the formal way of talking about having smaller steps, but taking a big project and chunking it into kind of the smallest one at a time things for students to do. And having lots of visual supports can help all students succeed. And the second half of this is having less task switching. So there's a beautiful, I love the comic that's here. I didn't draw this. So this is something that someone is calling tendril theory. And it says why it's hard to switch tasks. So when I'm focused on something, my mind sends out a million tendrils of thought, expands into all of the thoughts and feelings. When I need to switch tasks, I must retract all of the tendrils of my mind. This takes some time. Eventually, I can shift to the new task, but when I am interrupted or must switch abruptly, It feels like all the tendrils are being ripped out. That's why I don't react well. Please just give me some time to switch tasks when I'm ready. So as much as you can cue students, okay, we have 5 minutes to wrap this up, that helps. And just generally structuring lessons so that students can move on independently when they're ready without us having to sort of catch and release them so much and be, distracting, honestly, for a lot of students that struggle with switching between different things. So those are some things to keep in mind. Another thing is better ways to ask and get answers. So a lot of the time I see teachers that ask students, why didn't you do your homework? Why didn't you do this worksheet? Why didn't you do your project? And that's something that's very tough for a lot of students to answer. Even high school or college students might not have the self-awareness to be able to give a coherent answer to something like that. And it can make students feel more helpless and more frustrated when they can't really answer why they didn't do it. So some better alternatives are things like, did you get distracted? Can you do it now? Is a step of this task getting you stuck? Are you missing something to start this task? Do you want me to start the task with you? So this year I noticed that my students are struggling a lot with just getting started with things. And so I circulate through my classroom and I always have a handful of sharpened pencils. So if a student needs a pencil, I immediately have one to hand them. And that way I can ask a fairly non-threatening question of, would you like a pencil? Which is more cheerful than, where's your pencil? Why don't you have your pencil out? The typical more frustrated teacher response to things like that. So these are ways that we can kind of reframe the same idea and be a little bit more productive with it. So these came from a website called ADHD Alien, which has a bunch of other really great information on it. This is a cool little chart of student behavior comparing how it looks to us as teachers or outsiders and how it might feel to the student. So something that looks rude or non-social or perfectionistic to us might feel to the student like it's direct or like they're being socially selective or anxious, and so keeping in mind that the way that we notice behavior and how it feels to the students might be quite different. And so you can tell students that you're picking up on atypical behavior by saying something. I try to say, I notice. So I'll say something to a student like, I notice your voice is very loud right now. And then I'll ask a question. Are you excited? And then I will wait for the student to answer and explain why they're doing something. This might sound really condescending. It might seem like that's a tricky thing to ask a high school or college level student, but it's actually something that's usually taken quite well because it doesn't escalate the situation. It's non-judgmental. You're saying, I'm noticing. And most students like being noticed. Most people like when you notice something, even if it's something sort of negative, like, I noticed your head is down, right? I had a student this morning who came in late, head down on the desk right away. So I went up to them and I said, I notice your head is down. Are you feeling tired? And then I got to hear about how they didn't go to sleep until 6 in the morning. And we talked about that a little bit, right? But if I had said, get your head up, or something that was much more confrontational, I probably wouldn't have been able to have a very positive interaction with the student. So don't assume things without asking first and listening. So sometimes if a student's head is down, they might be tired, then it might have a headache. They might be sad. I had a student earlier this week, a 7th grader, who told me that their head was down because they were feeling extra sad. You don't know until you ask. So just maintain that curiosity and try to challenge your own internal assumptions about why people might behave different ways. I'm not sure if the phrase or the word stimming is something that is being used in Oklahoma. But stimming is talking about when students are, fidgeting, are flapping their hands in different ways, are doing different, to a teacher, potentially distracting behaviors. So there's an article that's called A Cognitive Defense of Stimming, or Why Quiet Hands Makes Math Harder. So a quote that I've pulled here says, if you find it hard to imagine how difficult it is to inhibit stimming for an extended period of time, try this. Imagine you have a bad case of poison ivy. You're not allowed to put any medication on it or to scratch where it itches. And I'm going to teach you how to find the limit of a function as x approaches a fixed constant. How much of that math lesson do you think you'll retain? Would you even care, right? So I don't know if there's poison ivy in Oklahoma. My backyard's covered in poison ivy. I'm very allergic to it, and this would be miserable for me. And so thinking about how some of our students might be having certain behaviors because they are trying to learn is an interesting way to think about things. Think about how, scratching is something that doesn't look very nice, but might be a student trying their best to be attentive in class. So another quote that I think is really powerful is a student that says, honestly, I think there were a lot of teachers who were fine with my education suffering as long as I didn't ruin it for the rest of the class. And I've definitely been guilty as a teacher of kind of feeling that way about a student once in a while, thinking, okay, I really hope that student just doesn't distract anyone else, even if they're not going to succeed in my class. And I really want to challenge that, in my own practice and hopefully with other educators also, that all students can succeed. Any student that ends up in my class, I'm going to try my best to teach. And sometimes that's going to be harder. Sometimes that's going to be easier. But I feel like that's my responsibility as a teacher to figure out how I can teach all different students and trying to figure out those solutions. Can we get someone, different, fidgets that are going to be quieter? I have a student this year who drums loudly just with their hands, he's always banging on the tables. And so trying to redirect that into something that's quieter and less distracting, but still helps that student, right? Because I don't want to be kicking that student out of my class either. And balancing all these different needs is personally what I love about teaching. To me, it's a very interesting problem. How do I help everyone in my classroom at once? But it's not easy. It's something that takes a lot of time and effort and practice. Other things you can be doing to support students with behavior needs. So prevent future situations by collaborating on coping strategies ahead of time. I always want to really emphasize that because I have seen teachers trying to collaborate with students on coping strategies in the middle of a meltdown. So I've seen a student crying under a library table, clearly freaking out, and having a teacher calmly try to ask, what are some things we can do to cope, right? That's not really the moment that that student is going to be in a state of mind to be able to answer that question, right? So we want to do that ahead of time, hopefully, or if a situation arises and things calm down, then afterwards, right? We want to give students access to a dedicated space in the classroom made for self-regulation and let them use it whenever they need, one student at a time. So this takes various forms at different grade levels, but I really encourage you, if you don't already have a brain break space in your class or a time and space, something where students can hang out just for a little bit, not for all class or anything, where they can calm down, where they can get out of their seat, stretch, do what they need to do. So this might be tricky depending on where you teach. If you teach in a computer lab or something like that, there might not be a very nice nook, but reach out to your elementary school teacher friends, ask what they're doing in their classrooms. There's a lot of cool things going on with different seating and all different stuff. But just having a space so students don't have to leave the classroom, because a lot of the time students want to leave to go for a walk, to take a break outside of the classroom. But if we can facilitate a safe spot in the classroom, that can be really helpful. And co-regulating with your students and working together as a team. So before we can learn to calm ourselves, we have to learn how we can be calmed by a trusted partner. So this is hopefully something that in a healthy family at home, students would have experienced early in life, but we know that not all of our students have had that luxury. And so we can be there for them as someone who can partner with them as a team to try to co-regulate, meaning we can model nice deep breaths ourselves. We can be present with that student in a calm way to help that student calm down. And of course, we want to be patient while students practice these skills. So learning to regulate our emotions and cope with daily stressors is hard work and won't happen immediately. My students' mental health has been just bananas since the pandemic. I mean, this year has been the hardest year of teaching, and that's probably also true in Oklahoma. And, we're just trying to figure out all different ways to support our students. And the best thing we can do is be patient, be calm, and be there for them. So these are some tips. The Neurodivergent Teacher is linked here. That's another really great resource with lots of similar ideas. This is a tweet from a couple years ago that I love. It says, students with disability are rarely acknowledged for the heavy burden of accommodations they make to cope at school, while it is others who believe they're making the accommodations. So people with disabilities, I accommodate everyone else in a lot of ways, because I'm not demanding that everyone change the way they do things. So I have celiac. I don't go into restaurants and demand that they only ever cook gluten-free things for me. right? I accommodate them by trying to figure out how I can be in their space, right? But that's me accommodating. That's not actually like the restaurant including one gluten-free thing for me doesn't really feel like an accommodation. That feels like, you know, maybe a little bit of a compromise, but it's really me that's doing the work there. And similarly, our students in school are accommodating us. They're tolerating noise they don't like. They're tolerating a seating chart they don't like, you know, all different things all day. And we think of ourselves as doing the accommodations legally and everything, but it's really a lot of that falls on the students. So that's a good thing to keep in mind when we think about all these things. A small thing that everyone can do if you use Google Chrome. So in slides, you can see that I'm using captions, but there's also, this is a new feature as of a couple months ago, you can live caption just anything in Chrome. So whether it's YouTube, Vimeo, just any media that you play in Chrome, it'll live caption in English. Unfortunately, it's not in other languages yet. I'm sure it will be soon. But this is a Chrome setting that you can change, and it's fantastic. It'll caption everything. It'll caption Facebook videos, and it'll even do it when your sound is off, which is kind of cool. So it's kind of doing a fancy web development thing to dig into the video and automatically caption it. But I love this. My auditory processing is not the best, and so I really appreciate this feature. This is something that I also just recently heard about, which is amazing. So this is all stuff that Colleen Lewis has created. These are a bunch of links to her YouTube channel stuff. But it's just incredible seeing someone create hands-on activities for really high-level concepts. So she's a professor at Harvey Mudd, and she's teaching how Java memory works, how inheritance works, like these high-level, college-level concepts. So if you're teaching, you know, APCSA, you might be teaching this in high school, but these are advanced things, but you can still have hands-on activities for them. And I love that because I do a lot of hands-on stuff with my younger students, with my middle schoolers, but I don't always do a great job of that with my high school students. So this is really challenging me to think better about how I'm teaching some of those more advanced high school and college level concepts. So these are fantastic. I really encourage you to check out all of her videos because being able to move Dixie cups around when you're learning about sorting is a lot more engaging than just learning about it in theory or watching a video. So I totally love her stuff. So check that out. In general, just collaborate, right? Talk to other teachers. You're already at a CSTA meeting, so that's awesome, right? If you have a GSA at your school, connect with them or start one. Again, you guys are in Oklahoma, so please, you know, check with your own admin and things like that. But you can find your chapter of GLSEN outside of school. So the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network is like a broader thing that might not have like a club at your school, but is sort of a broader CSTA-like thing with different local chapters. You can educate other staff about these issues. You can encourage your admin to do PD on this stuff, right? Talk to your special ed staff, talk to families, talk to your DEI teams, and talk to students. So just ask students what you can improve on. Ask students what they want. Ask students if there's another teacher in the building that's doing an awesome job with something. My first year of teaching, I gave my students tons of Google Forms all year, like surveying them like every quarter, asking what they liked and didn't and all different things. And one of my coworkers found out about this and she was horrified. She was like, "Are you sure you want to know what they might say?" And I said, "Yes, of course I want to know what they might say. I'm new at this. I want to know what I'm doing wrong. I want to do better," right? So I hope we can all have that growth mindset. Here's some more LGBTQ youth in America statistics. So here it's saying 4 out of 10 LGBT youth believe that their community is not accepting of LGBT people. LGBT youth are twice as likely as their peers to experience bullying and or physical assault, right? Hopefully we're all here tonight because we agree that these are serious issues, but if you need stats to back you up as you present this to admin or your colleagues, there's plenty of statistics and studies out there. So 92% of LGBT youth are saying that they hear negative comments about being LGBT. So hopefully we're in a great place as teachers where we can start challenging that and pushing back on it. So that's all I have to say. So I went through that as fast as I could because I was hoping we'd have time for questions. If you're interested in connecting more with my chapter of CSTA, I'm part of CSTA Western Mass, and we have an upcoming Twitter chat. So we've been trying to do a little bit more social media stuff. At the end of the month, we're going to share back how we celebrated Black history in our classrooms and talk about that. And I'm pretty excited that's my friend Andrea is running that. You can also, of course, contact me. This is my email address. I'm going to drop my email and a link to these slides in the chat. But I would love to spend whatever the rest of the time we have to just talk about anything anyone wants to. I saw some great resources being shared in the chat. And so I'm curious to go look at, all different things. But if anyone has any questions or things you want to say or share or talk about, I'm totally here for that.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm so glad you're going to share your slides. Several people were messaging me asking because there's so many amazing links that they want to explore further. So thank you for that. I did have a question. Somebody actually asked me yesterday regarding pronouns, and the person that they were talking to had a she/they pronoun, and they weren't sure, like, does that mean they go by both, or what's the appropriate way to address them? And also, like, if you mess up, like what do you do? So we want to be respectful, but like, we make mistakes.
Yeah, those are great questions. And so sometimes people have multiple sets of pronouns that they're comfortable with. So she/they means that you could address them with she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs. Those are both equally correct things to say. And in general, when you're learning someone's pronouns, you're going to make mistakes if it's something that doesn't seem intuitive to you, but you're going to practice, just the same way that if I called you Kirsten instead of Kristen, like, it's that same level of apology of like, oh, oops, sorry. And then you just like move on. It doesn't have to be like a huge thing. Now, if you and I have been talking to each other for a year and I'm still calling you Kirsten, you might start to think that's kind of disrespectful, but if it's a one-off, if I'm writing a quick email and the autocorrect or whatever happens, you don't have to sweat it that much. Now, some of your students might be more emotional depending on, it's a pandemic. A lot of my students are hanging by a thread. And so that might be the 17th time today that someone misgendered them and they might freak out a little. But for the most part, especially with adults, you just move on. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah, Vanessa?
If I could add something on there where I screwed up once. I was with two people I knew separately, and they misgendered my friend. And I texted them like under the table, and I was like, they go by they. And I thought about it later, and I was like, oh crap, I just centered this person's, like, I just protected this person and kind of was like trying to not embarrass them. But when I did that, that was at the expense of my friend who had been misgendered. So even best intentions, like.
Yeah, and you could usually let people speak. If I'm in a group and someone misgenders me and no one steps in to correct them, I really don't care that much. It's not actually that big of a deal in my life. I have great queer community, and my husband is very supportive and everything. Like, I'm affirmed in my daily life. If someone at a party uses the wrong pronouns for me, I really don't care that much. And so something that I also just want to push back on, because there's a lot of media lately that's like, oh my God, if you misgender one student once, you're going to go to jail for bias or something. Like, that's not really how most trans people are. The issues in our lives are things like healthcare access, where I have more trouble. Like, if I'm seeing doctors, they might make certain assumptions about what body parts I do or don't have and things like that. Like, that's a bigger issue in my life. Like, I've had to give medical doctors the "where do babies come from" talk because there were assumptions made about what body parts I did or didn't have. And so things like that are a problem. But in the classroom or among colleagues or just adults socializing, it's really not something that's that big of a deal.
And I like how, in your presentation, there were so many things that I was like, I've done that. Like, you're not realizing at the time, like, oh, I could have done better. But what I love is, like, now that we know better, we can do better. So like I said, I used to always say, ladies and gentlemen, let's do blah, 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 thinking I'm modeling respect, but like, actually, there's lots of better ways I can address them. So I really appreciate you bringing those kinds of things to our attention.
Yeah, I'm a teacher. I can't stand when I'm in professional development and they say things like I was in a mandatory thing last night where they were like, "Oh, how can we accommodate students?" And then the answer was by differentiating instruction. I'm like, "Great, thanks. That's very helpful." And so giving very specific strategies, and I'm sure not everyone is going to find every strategy useful or applicable, but giving you a dozen different things, here, try one of these, is something that I find much more useful as an educator.
I was going to say, from your presentation, what I found the most useful is I teach pre-service teachers, and I liked your categories that you had in your lesson plan because they don't know any better. Meaning this is what we always do. We always think about how this includes family and how this, I can throw some stuff in there and make it part of their practice because they haven't seen a lesson plan before. And I really like that idea because, one reason that I'm involved with pre-service teachers is that I'm hoping to change things moving forward, that I can do positive influence. And so I really am I actually took a screenshot of that so that I could talk to my faculty about it because I thought that was a great idea.
That's awesome. Yeah. And there's all different kinds of things like that. And so people will talk about place-based education. And so for instance, like right now it's Black History Month. And so the dance teacher at my school, I teach at a conservatory of the arts. So we have dance teachers and things. And she was sharing that, there was a very specific dancer who was local to Springfield, who was Black, who did really cool stuff involving jazz dance. And it's nice when we can have that like local connection and things like that also. So thinking about, our students' families, our local geography, our local history, the current moment and current events and things like that, lots of different ways to connect things.
That's awesome. Do we have any more questions for NJ or comments? Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us on your free time, your personal time. NJ is not charging us a fee to speak to us this evening, so we really appreciate that. We will be making a donation on her behalf to the Oklahoma Equality Center so that we can help support other students. And we just really appreciate all the concrete. I love that it was theory and research based, but concrete tips that we can start doing tomorrow. So thank you so much, NJ, for being here.
Great. Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.